Convoy is a futuristic dieselpunk vehicle squad game where you will start off as a simple transport team and end up as a pile of scrap or an unstoppable military convoy. The game has one game mode, that being the default light campaign mode, where you will be traveling through a semi-open world where you can travel anywhere you want exactly when you want to. The game cycles between 3 activities, traveling across a world map, making decisions in conversation encounters and vehicle combat. When traveling over the world map, you can go in any direction you please over any terrain, so most of the time you are incentivized to try and follow the road. Rougher terrain will slow you down, take more fuel, and increase the likeliness of encountering dangerous events. So there are situations where you have to travel across dangerous terrain to reach signals, objectives and stores. Throughout the game you will come across randomly scattered handmade dialogue events. Some of them are shorter events that end as quickly as the start, but there are a lot of lengthy events where you will have to travel through multiple locations to complete. While not all of these are as open, there are a lot of events you can drastically change the outcome of for different results. None of the optional encounters you get will have any long-term effects beyond the loot you gain. All of the events you encounter are optional. Your real objective is to complete 4 main objectives and return to your starting locations where you start your journey. Though there is a small chance to find random encounters that will complete your main objectives. Finally, the vehicle combat. The combat involves real-time grid movement trucks where you operate with persistent escort trucks and your main cargo vehicle. The escort trucks are armed and armored with equipment you find, from shield generators to a variety of weapons and gadgets. The escort vehicles are relatively expendable. While you will not lose the game if some of them dies, you are incentivized to try to keep them alive, because new vehicles are hard to come across. You control them through a chessboard grid movement system where they can only go in a straight line. This can be used to box in targets, block line of sight, or even force foes into deadly hazards along the road, like instant kill structures, rock walls or even mines. Your main cargo truck, however, is a static block that cannot be moved and does not have automated weapons. It can, however, be kitted with extremely deadly manually activated weapons or critical support items like personal shielding or health transfer to heal your escorts. Your vehicles can be customized with different types of equipment, but only with compatible items. White outline items, for instance, are exclusive to your main cargo truck. There are also attribute upgrades, which you can permanently upgrade. Different vehicles are unique in how they can be upgraded. Small vehicles, for instance, are not durable, but make up for it in great mobility, and vice versa for heavy trucks. What kind of team you wish for to assemble is all up to you, and partly dice rolls in terms of what equipment you find. This is definitely a game where you should use some strategy. There is a rock paper scissors weapon system in the game where you should pick targets for each individual truck depending on its equipment, and think about positioning since vehicles block most friendly and hostile fire. The AI has some competence. They might try to capitalize on superior weapon range and speed to kite your trucks, avoid dangers on the road, and their ultimate goal is to destroy your main vehicle, which they will actively take free shots at if you let them go uncontested. There are some random factors, though they are quite minimal and will not determine victory beside what equipment you acquire. The combat is strategy based and your actions will determine the outcome. While the game is in real time, there is a pause option that lets you perform precision actions. There is no option to increase or decrease the game speed. You can play as much or as little as you please and save and exit whenever you want. That includes in combat, and return to exactly where you left. The instructions on your objectives are as clear as it gets. Follow the arrow when you're doing it right. All objectives has markers and you simply have to choose a route. The game will be a bit confusing in the start, but you will quickly learn the ropes. The hardest part initially will be learning the controls, the grid movement and having to manually target vehicles. There is a tutorial which will teach you the basics as well if you're not sure if you want to go through the trial and error of learning the basics of the game. Also, the rock paper scissors weapon system and certain poorly explained interface options might be a minor pain. Beside the initial learning curve, though I'd say that the game is very user-friendly. There is an indicator on the left side of the screen that tells you if your escorts are having trouble with firing or something, for instance. There is a clear weapon indicator when selecting friendly or hostile vehicles. Your main cargo truck's cooldowns are neatly displayed in the lower left corner, and whenever lethal debris are coming to you, there is a skull indicator on the right side that indicates where they are coming from. There is no full library on different weapons and equipment's effects and numbers, but what equipment you have will be sporting extensive amount of information about them. So if you want to educate yourself without grinding your face through trial and error, you might want to check a wiki. From what little I've tested, the higher difficulties gives you these resources after each battle and event. You meet tougher enemies and enemies scales faster, but I have no idea if enemies gets tougher beyond the upgrade limit. I would not necessarily call this a game exclusively for hardcore dedicated players. Anyone of any skill level could get into the game and potentially beat it by using tactical movement and the pulse option. When starting the game, you're introduced with a short cinematic, and when you choose your vehicle, we'll be able to ask about different faction strengths and your main objectives for some hints about what you're required to do. The game certainly tries to create a world. There is extensive amounts of information about different factions, a good load about technology in the universe, and without spoiling anything in the ending, it makes it sound like the entire game is just a preview for a larger universe. Convoy Games, yes that is the company's name, has a new game in development which they hope to release sometime in 2018, though if the two are related I could not find any information about. The game takes thematic inspiration from Mad Max, but with far more technology and gameplay inspired from Faster Than Light, though Convoy Games has tried to make a distinct game of their own. And there are no secrets per se, there are some rare events, but you will eventually see all the game has to offer. Most of the game will be driving through deserts and fighting on the same road. There will be some occasional cities you drive through, but you will quickly see all assets the game has to offer. This is a game that likely is unsuited for the youngest demographic. There is profanity, vicious immoral choices left, right and center, and other unsavory elements that builds up to a serious tone. There is nothing related to religion in the game, and no discrimination beyond one event, depending on how far you're willing to stretch it. This dialogue line does not represent in any way the rest of the game. There is no other events depicting sex, nudity or less respectful description in the game. When starting a new round, you can choose between different main cargo trucks and different escort vehicles that you have unlocked. These will have different statistics and baseline equipments. These are unlocked by completing achievements. There are no cosmetic alterations, different vehicles are bound to their respective appearance. So weapons and equipment are displayed on top of the trucks so you can see what enemies are geared with. There are two extremely short cinematics in the game, one when you boot up the game and one when you manage to defeat the game. There are no unique abilities or traits locked behind progress barriers. What you can and cannot do is determined by your equipment and upgrades. Equipment can be acquired by defeating enemies in combat, completing random events and purchasing it from stores, and vehicle upgrades can be enhanced at stores. You need to find a store in order to switch out equipment, and it cannot be done in the field. While your vehicles are limited to what they can equip, they can certainly be upgraded to maximal efficiency. The upgrades are relatively cheap, so once you're decked out with the equipment you desire and got a full escort squad, it is certainly something you should try to do. There are no game session recordings for you to analyze what mistakes you did in the game, though there are some statistics stored about your deeds if you're interested in such. There are no direct vehicle squad-based real-time comparison I can think of that tries to do what Convoy does. The closest thing I can think of is Faster Than Light, but it is still a distant comparison. Convoy is a game where you will be performing more on-the-go actions instead of analyzing the situation and executing a 2-minute plan to dismantling your foes. In Convoy you operate with several limited range vehicles that need line of sight, which you will constantly be moving around with constant firing weapons, and there are no battles that will end in an internal stalemate, thanks to the armor durability system there. In Faster Than Light, you operate with a single spacecraft, generally with weapons that can target the enemy at any given time, and far more static combat, which involves strategically dismantling your foe with synchronized long weapon cooldowns impacts, and a shield defense system which can mathematically make you impervious to certain ships' lack of damage outputs, or the other way around where you cannot defeat your foe. And traveling in Convoy involves fairly open routes where you can go almost wherever you want, in what order you desire, so long as you got the fuel to do so. So one of the biggest differences are that in Convoy, you cannot flee from combat that you have engaged in. Once the fight has started, you win or you die. If you lose all of your escorts and your main truck has no offensive capabilities, you have essentially lost unless you somehow manage to make the foes crash into dangerous terrain. As for the social side, there is none. No co-op, no multiplayer, no high scores or any other social elements. Performance-wise, the game runs well for me, between 1600 frames per second according to Fraps, and there are extremely short loading screens between transits, lasting at most 5 seconds for me, except for when the game is booting up. Stability as well is as good as it gets for me with no crashes and few bugs, one being the vehicle attack order indicator being stuck on a screen after I lost once, which was solved by relaunching the game, and quite rarely vehicles stacking on top of each other, but that is very rarely. Others have reported on a problem where progress refused to be saved. It was a problem at launch I believe they patched, so I think I know what they're talking about. On easy mode when defeating the end boss, it does not register as a victory for some reason. I know that I have defeated the end boss several times, yet it does not show in the statistics. I've not been able to check if defeating the end boss on the medium or hard difficulty registered as a victory, but I've just unlocked one of the main cargo trucks and rebooted the game, yet kept it saved, so I believe it is just the end boss victory being bugged currently. This could be related to data being stored on your computer and not on company server. The controls are fairly smooth and responsive. It takes a few minutes to get used to the chessboard tile-based movement logic, but overall the controls are solid, and it was made for PC and not available on other platforms. And the game does not require internet as well, depending on where you bought it digitally. On the adjustment side there is not much to speak of. Audio-wise there are sliders for music, sound effect and voice volume. The voice volume is something you will likely want to turn down or off. The only thing it adds is a minor quote for each respective faction before combat starts. There is full screen bordered and windowed mode. The windowed and bordered mode I think might be what the art assets are drawn in, since the size cannot be altered. That's just a personal guess on my side, and not the words of any of the Convoy Games developers. Car effects from what I can tell just adds a wheel trail as the vehicle travels. Shake multiplayer is something you might want to turn off if you're sensitive to headaches or nausea. This will cause the screen to shake whenever an explosive weapon is used or something in general explodes. I honestly am not sure what Pixel Perfect does. I think it might be a slightly more stylized interface when it is disabled. Vehicles are not as bright or unaffected by it. And there are no colorblind rebinding keys or other fancy adjustments. So there is a strange text document you can tweak with. The game has randomized names on vehicles, and this is tied to an easily modified note block file. The list consists of prefix, middle and special names. Most names either consists of 2 middle names or contain some prefix or suffix along with the middle name. Special names are full consistent names unaffected by the rest of the lists. If you're on YouTube or streamer or just got a group of friends, you can randomize who to tag along with you, though there still is the option to simply add the names manually in-game. The game, from what I can tell, does have some external modification potential, with new quests and vehicles. I do not have any personal experience with how moddable it is, but it seems to be possible. I'd personally say that the fun of the game starts when you get a full escort decked out with gear, and when you start to really coordinate attacks, block shots, and have a wide set of abilities from your main truck that can cast to control the battlefield. And I'd say that the game creates the fun for you by putting you in situations where you have to react to what the game throws at you. The game is an finished product without microtransactions or a demo to try out. There are no more updates planned. It was a learning experience for them, and they have not excluded the possibility of Convoy 2 in the future after the existing work in progress is done, but Convoy 1 is essentially done. Depending on the digital store you bought it from, it does not require an internet connection, so there is no chance of suddenly losing the connection. Everything is yours once you have bought the game. There is no microtransactions, expansions or other content gating. Replayability is certainly there, with different encounters, variety of equipment and different vehicles. There is certainly a reason to go through it more than once. The game is not intensive on systems, and there is border than no loading screens once you have booted up the game, so if you do not have the strongest of PCs you can still play it. There is modding potential in the game, so there might be more content out there if you grow tired of the base game. Certain parts of the game outside of the combat is poorly explained, such as being able to sell old vehicles in the store when purchasing new ones. The game is relatively short or small, you are not going off to explore a grand adventure. You start off with a baseline set of vehicles and have to unlock the rest of the starter variants. It will mainly just be determining what you can do initially, and you can certainly win with them, but it is still there. That was all I had to say about Convoy. Hopefully I was able to formulate what the game has to offer clear enough. If there is anything I did not answer, then feel free to ask below and I will do what I can to answer it. Stay intact and have a nice day.